My childhood friend fell for a bad boy. She said he was different from everyone else, alive in a way that illuminated her otherwise monotonous life, like a beam of light cutting through the dark. She skipped classes for dates with him. She fought for him. She threw everything, me included, into the fire for him. My 10 years of secret love were reduced to ashes in that blaze. After that, I left the country, and never saw her again. But, to my surprise, 10 years later, I ran into her again at a business meeting. I thought she would have married her boyfriend from back then, living happily ever after. But instead, she stared at me with wide eyes, tears welling up right there in front of everyone. Do you know how long I've been searching for you? It was at a business gala where I saw Anna Hurst again. She had her head lowered in thought, a swan-like neck pale and delicate, peeking out from under her hair. Despite being surrounded by people in a sea of laughter and clinking glasses, she seemed to carve out a private space of stillness, a vacuum zone that screamed, "Stay away." It was unmistakable. 10 years had passed, and she seemed even more distant than before, her gaze as cold as the eternal ice of a polar tundra. Maybe it was only when she looked at Henry that the ice finally melted into a warmth that felt like spring. She didn't notice me, her eyes stayed downcast, a hint of impatience in her expression. As I stared, one of the people nearby whispered, "That's the Hurst family's eldest daughter. Just returned from England and took over the business. Heard she's an Oxford grad. Came back and immediately took control of the board. Not your typical, brainless rich kid. Pretty, right?" he added, winking with a suggestive grin. I didn't respond, but in my mind, I couldn't help but picture the Anna Hurst I once knew. At 17, Anna's skin was so fair it almost looked translucent under the sunlight. Her eyes, looking into mine, always carried a soft smile, and her voice was as pure as melting ice in a spring stream. "George, let's both get into Harvard, okay?" That memory feels like a lifetime ago. So distant I could barely recall it, yet now, as I think of it, it's as vivid as if it were yesterday. I set my glass back on the server's tray, softly murmuring, "No need. Let's go." Just then, Anna's gaze swept over the room, then suddenly froze on me. She stopped in her tracks. Without another moment's hesitation, she pushed her way through the crowd, her pace quickening until she was almost running. Her high heels echoed loudly against the floor with sharp, urgent clicks. "George," she called out, her voice trembling with disbelief. I don't know if I was seeing things, but her eyes seemed a little red. I pretended not to notice. I turned and walked away. My story with Anna Hurst wasn't anything special. Our families had been close since we were kids, we were even born in the same hospital. You could call us the definition of childhood sweethearts. Anna was always proud, as if the world revolved around her and everyone else was just disposable trash. By elementary school, she had enough love letters to fill half a drawer. Not that she ever bothered to read them. She would just rip each one to shreds right in front of the boys, tossing it all into the trash with a blank face. And she had every right to be proud. She came from a wealthy family, had flawless looks, and was ridiculously smart. At 3, she started learning foreign languages. By 11, she hacked into her father's company firewall and stole confidential documents, making her dad furious, but somehow also proudly boasting about it. But in front of me, she always held back. Anna never skipped grades. As she put it, if I didn't stick around to help you, George, you'd probably be doomed. So, from elementary school onward, right after school, I would either go to her house or she would come to mine. We'd study together while playing, and she'd constantly tap my head with her pen, exasperated, saying, "George, how many times have I gone over this simple question with you? Are you just stupid or what? With a genius like Anna as my tutor, even if I am a fool, I should have learned it." Our grades were always first and second, she at the top, me just behind. We were inseparable in every way, and her mom would always joke that we were like 2 peas in a pod. Every time she said that, I would blush and stay quiet, but inside, I was happier than I'd ever let on. Who wouldn't love Anna? She was that beautiful, that talented. And she showed me a love that was completely unapologetic and unique. If the story ended here, it would be the perfect childhood sweethearts happily ever after. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before Henry came into the picture. Henry was unlike any other guy I'd ever met. To put it nicely, he was a free spirit. To put it bluntly, he was a bad boy. He transferred to our school in sophomore year, and word was he'd been expelled from his previous school for causing trouble. He never paid attention in class and often skipped out to mess around. He wore black tight-fitting tank tops that showed off the faint outline of his abs and tattoos, turning the heads of the girls who couldn't help but sneak glances at him. He loved relationships, he'd dated almost every pretty girl in school. People whispered about him, but he didn't care. In fact, he'd turn those whispers into stories to tell. He hung out with other troublemakers outside school, and after classes, you'd see him chewing gum, straddling a motorcycle, and revving the engine as the girls clinging to him screamed in delight. In a world where everyone seemed to fit the same mold, he was a firework, a blazing spectacle that caught everyone's attention. Including Anna's. Anna and Henry should never have crossed paths. One was a rebellious underachiever who barely scraped by in school, with parents who were gamblers and couldn't care less about him. The teachers didn't even bother to acknowledge him. The other was Anna, a straight-A student, disciplined, from a well-off family, and a star in the eyes of both teachers and parents. But somehow, their paths crossed. When Anna first received Henry's love letter, she tossed it straight into the trash. Then Henry delivered a second letter in person. He cornered her against the wall, grinning mischievously as he pinned her hands above her head. Leaning in, he blew a puff of white smoke in her face and whispered in her ear, "Anna, I like you. Date me." There were a lot of guys who liked Anna, but none of them dared to pursue her like this. I thought Anna would react the way she always did with the others, coldly rejecting him without a second thought. But instead, for the first time, she looked uncertain. Her ears turned pink as she nervously avoided his gaze. Anna and Henry started dating. In her words, Henry was different from everyone else, he was vibrant, like a beam of light that brightened her otherwise monotonous life. I would often run into Henry at the school gate, his arm around Anna's neck as they walked out together. He'd smirk and wink at her, teasing, "George is waiting for you. Are you going to do homework with him?" His friends would laugh and chime in, "Yeah, Anna, go home and study, George is waiting for you." I felt a little uncomfortable, frowning at Anna. But she just gave me a faint look before linking her arm through Henry's and walking off without saying a word to me. Henry turned around, giving me a look full of both pity and mockery. I stood there at the school gate for a while before finally lowering my head and leaving alone. Henry didn't like me, and he sure didn't want Anna to be around me. Anna stopped reaching out to me. When I tried to contact her, she coldly rejected me. She didn't go to the library with me anymore, nor did she help me with my studies. Instead, she skipped classes with Henry to go on dates, fought with other delinquent girls on his behalf, and even secretly borrowed her parents' car to race with him. That year, I became the top student in the grade for the first time in my life. Meanwhile, Anna's grades plummeted. Her parents were furious, and the teachers tried to lecture her, but it was like she was under some kind of spell, completely captivated by Henry. In the end, Anna's mom asked me to find her. I didn't want to. I knew Anna wouldn't listen to me. But I still went. For that girl who once scolded me for being stupid and promised we'd go to Harvard together. I found her in a short skirt and fishnet stockings, her hair dyed bright colors, wearing skull rings on her fingers, smoking with Henry in an alley. They exchanged a kiss behind a cloud of white smoke. She was almost unrecognizable from the meticulous girl she once was. I walked up and grabbed her arm, pulling her aside. Anna looked at me with irritation. "Are you going to lecture me like them?" I clenched my fists, holding back the urge to plead with her. "Anna, didn't we promise to go to Harvard together?" I paused, feeling the ache in my chest, nearly begging, "I know you like Henry. I'm not trying to stop you, but can you at least wait until we get into Harvard?" But Anna just scoffed, and Henry came over, wrapping his arm around her neck and planting a kiss on the corner of her lips. He looked at me over her shoulder, eyes filled with malice and challenge. "George, Anna's my girlfriend. Why should her go to Harvard with you? What are you even to her?" My face turned pale as I looked at Anna, but she just avoided my gaze. "How about this? Let her decide. So you don't keep hoping." Henry blew out a puff of smoke, nudging Anna with his elbow. "Make your choice, him or me." Even now, I still remember that brief yet agonizing evening. The sunset was a fiery, faded crimson, and I stood there, waiting for Anna's judgment. After a moment, she smirked. Then she kissed Henry deeply in front of me, and when she was done she looked him in the eyes and said to me, "Does that even need to be said?" I walked quickly and went straight to the car. Behind me, Anna's face was as white as paper, standing at the gate, frantically searching, but she couldn't find me. The streetlights cast a long, thin shadow of her, almost fragile, as if it could snap with the slightest touch. I leaned against the driver's seat and lit a cigarette. The smoke filled the enclosed space of the car, and I closed my eyes slightly. I never used to smoke. It was a habit I picked up after I went abroad. Tobacco doesn't exactly bring happiness, but it helps to momentarily forget the worries. The reason I left the country was because I nearly burned to death in that fire. That afternoon, when I went to find Anna, the delinquent boy who had fought with Henry came to settle the score. I heard his sister had once been involved with Henry, and after she got rejected, she kept bothering him, which led to Anna slapping her. The boy couldn't take the humiliation, so he brought his boss along. That afternoon, the three of us were thrown into a van. Henry took the worst of the beating, covered in blood. Then, we were dumped in an abandoned warehouse, waiting for the so-called boss to decide our fate. The bodies of young men can take a beating, and while it looked bad, it was just a few superficial injuries. Henry woke up quickly and managed to untie his hands. The warehouse had 2 doors. Anna, who liked to take things apart as a child, had once even dismantled the lock on the front door at home. She used a piece of wire to open the door, and just as the 3 of us were about to make a run for it, the delinquents suddenly heard the noise and kicked open the door. I instinctively looked at Anna. In a split second, her gaze landed on Henry. She grabbed his hand and ran. My hand froze in midair, and an icy chill spread through my veins. As they fled, Henry didn't forget to slam the door shut right in front of me. That 1 second, the door was all that stood between my escape. After that day, I didn't think about it for a long time. The delinquent knew me. He knew Anna and I were childhood friends. Anna and Henry ran off, and the anger of the delinquents was all directed at me. They broke one of my legs with a bat, and I didn't know how many times I was hit. By the end, I was barely breathing. Finally, the delinquents set the warehouse on fire. The flames were hot, scorching, and the smoke made my eyes dry, unable to produce any tears. But all I felt was cold. Cold to the bone. That fire burned away my 10 years of unspoken love. But I didn't die. A kind stranger saw the fire and called the fire department. It was sheer luck that they were nearby, and the fire crew arrived quickly. After I was rescued, my parents were completely shattered. I lay in the hospital for a full 2 weeks, and when I finally woke up, I said only one thing to my parents. I don't want to be here anymore. Because of that incident, I could never engage in intense physical activity again. I used to love playing basketball, running long distances, and skiing. But after that, all of it was off limits. Our families completely severed ties, and Anna's parents came to see us several times, but my parents just kept throwing them out. Afterward, to escape this place of painful memories, my parents moved the whole family abroad. I changed my contact information and completely cut off all ties to the past. For the next 10 years, Anna and I never saw each other again. I was 17 that year. And that was how my youth ended, suddenly, painfully, and almost comically, with no chance to prepare. At 27, I returned to my country to take over the family business. I never expected to see Anna again. The moment I laid eyes on her, all the pain that had been buried for 10 years suddenly surged back. I instinctively turned away from her. Anna. A name that had brought so much light to my first 17 years. And then, when I was 17, she pushed me straight into hell. Truth be told, what happened that day wasn't entirely Anna's fault. She chose Henry, and not choosing me wasn't really a mistake. But I didn't want to see her again. Maybe the harder you try to avoid someone, the more fate insists on bringing them back. I never imagined the second time I would see Anna would come so quickly. In the conference room, Anna stood frozen by the door. She was staring at me, her body stiff as if it had turned to stone. After a long while, her lips began to tremble. I couldn't tell if it was just my imagination, but I even saw her eyes begin to redden. A whirlwind of emotions stirred in me, and for a moment, I almost lost control. Selena, standing next to me, glanced over. "Are you all right?" Her question snapped me out of my stupor, and I steadied my voice. "I'm fine." The entire negotiation dragged on with both Anna and I distracted. I felt like I was sitting on a bed of nails, and as soon as the meeting ended, I was ready to leave. But Anna grabbed my arm. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her voice was hoarse as she said, "George, that day, it was you, right? I've been looking for you for so many years." In that moment, memories flooded back uncontrollably. The unbearable pain. The scorching heat of the flames. The leg that could no longer handle any strenuous activity. I yanked my arm away. "Miss Anna, please show some respect." She desperately called after me. "George, I know I wronged you back then. I've thought about that day every single day. I. Just as I was about to lose my composure and walk away, Selina suddenly stepped in front of me. "Miss Anna," she said, her voice casual but her tone icy. "Business is business, but why are you arguing with our president in public? You may not care about what people say about you, but our company's reputation is still important." Anna froze for a moment, then furrowed her brows. "This is between George and me. We've known each other for years. Please move aside." Selina glanced at me. I furrowed my brow, irritation bubbling inside me. She turned back with a scoff. "Sorry, Miss Anna. We have another meeting to attend. Anything you need to discuss, save it for later." With that, she grabbed my hand and dragged me out of the room. Ex-girlfriend? Once we got in the car, I sat there in silence, lost in my thoughts. Selina kept sneaking glances at me before finally asking. "Was she your ex?" I shook my head and muttered softly. "No. Did she hurt you before?" I stayed quiet. Selina cursed under her breath. "That woman doesn't look like a good person. Why didn't you say something?" Her comment broke through my stormy mood, and I couldn't help but laugh. "What good would it do? You want me to go beat her up?" "Of course." Selina responded, indignant. "What did she do? Tell me." I didn't say anything. After a brief silence, Selina handed me a bottle of water. "Next time you see her, I'll help you beat her up." I glanced at her, her face filled with regret for not doing something to Anna just then, and I couldn't help but smile. The bitterness inside me slowly started to melt away. Selina and Anna were two completely different people. After seeing Anna again, I had heard a bit about her. I thought, with how much she had loved Henry, she would be with him forever. But to my surprise, after I was rescued, they broke up. Apparently, it ended badly. Anna even slapped Henry in public, and then they went their separate ways. She seemed to have come to her senses. Within a semester, she regained the top spot in her class and got into Oxford. After graduation, she continued to gain experience in France, and not long ago, she returned to the country to take over her family business. She drove a Maybach, wore high-end fashion, and even when she sat with others, she seemed to be in another world. Selina, on the other hand, was different. Her family was wealthy too, but she didn't have the slightest air of a privileged second generation. When she worked late, she'd sometimes sleep on a folding bed in the office with us. Her hair was a mess in the mornings. She wore cheap t-shirts most of the time, played with us, and had no pretensions at all. Being around her was easy. As she put it, I really didn't seem so miserable anymore. After seeing Anna, I began having trouble sleeping. Even when I did manage to sleep, my dreams were filled with nightmares. The dreams were always the same, a burning inferno, everything soaked in red. Amidst the choking black smoke, Anna was holding Henry's hand, coldly watching me, and then she pushed me into a bottomless abyss. And I would wake up, drenched in sweat. I took a day off, not wanting to stay at home, but not knowing where to go either. I wandered aimlessly, and when I came to my senses, I realized I had walked to the entrance of my old high school. I stood there for a long time, when suddenly, someone walked up behind me. It was Anna. The last time I saw her, I didn't pay much attention to her appearance, but now, looking at her, I could see how much she had changed in the 10 years since. She was taller. Her figure, no longer the thin, delicate one from our youth, had become fuller, more mature. Her face, adorned with makeup, looked sophisticated. But when she stood there in a black, fitted coat, I almost felt like I could still see the Anna from when we were 17. But the girl who used to patiently explain things to me while scolding me for being stupid had faded into a blur. What replaced her was the one who had left me behind. I instinctively frowned and took a step back, preparing to leave. But Anna stopped me. After a long silence, her voice was dry when she spoke. "George, I owe you an apology. I've been looking for you all these years. I keep dreaming about that day, and I regret abandoning you every single moment." I curled my lips coldly. What's the use of saying that now? The harm was already done. An apology couldn't erase everything. Anna smiled bitterly. "I know. Saying sorry doesn't help. I just want to make it up to you. Can you give me a chance?" "No need." I kept my face expressionless. "Anna, I don't want to see you again. Let's just pretend we're strangers." "Strangers?" She repeated it, her voice carrying a painful, awkward edge. She took a step forward, her expression slightly frantic. George, I know you're angry with me, you hate me, and if you want to beat me or yell at me, I'll take it. But we were together for so long, and now you want to be strangers? I was foolish back then. She trembled, but I really regret it. I lowered my head, clenching my fists. The chaotic emotions inside me surged and screamed through my mind. I had to use every ounce of my strength to suppress the urge to strike her. Anna, can you stop being so shameless? Just because you regret it, does that mean I have to forgive you? Do you know that? I clenched my teeth, and my mouth was filled with the taste of iron. What on earth have I been through? You dare stand in front of me now? Anna's brows furrowed in pain, and she was speechless. Did I hate Anna all these years? Of course, I hated her. But not to that extent. She loved Henry, chose him, and it wasn't really a mistake for her to give up on me. But what was my fault? Who could I blame? Over the years, I had come to terms with it. Perhaps it was just bad luck, this was my cross to bear. I had never expected her apology. I just wanted to never see her again for the rest of my life. Anna called out behind me, her voice desperate and hoarse. George, did you like me back then? I want to tell you, I liked you too, I was just too stupid to see it. I didn't stop walking. Saying you liked me now was just ridiculous. I had liked Anna for many years, really liked her. I waited for her for many years. But that fragile, youthful love couldn't withstand such a catastrophe. It was like paper, easily consumed by the flames. Now, all I felt for her was disgust. Disgust to the point that I never wanted to look at her again. Back then, she didn't choose me. And I didn't need her to choose me anymore. As I reached the street corner, I suddenly froze. A man in a faded jacket, who had just taken off his sunglasses in surprise, called out. George? He smiled. Do you remember me? I'm Henry. At the business dinner I attended with Selina, I heard a familiar voice in the hallway while heading to the restroom. Peering around the corner, I saw Henry, dressed in a suit, embracing Anna from behind. I've never forgotten you all these years. I've been thinking about you, Anna. It was clear that Henry hadn't been doing well over the years. His suit was ill-fitting and awkward, with his ankles exposed. The rebellious attitude he once had turned into a slippery demeanor, and his stomach had begun to protrude. He had gained weight, and it seemed like he had somehow managed to sneak into the event. I glanced at the scar on his profile. After I went abroad, my friends had defended me by finding someone to beat up Henry. That time, he was almost beaten to death. My friends came from wealthy and influential families, and Henry had no idea who had beaten him up. He could only chalk it up to bad luck. Later, he got into more trouble and was expelled. He couldn't find a job because he had no experience. My friends kept an eye on him, making sure every job he tried to get fell through. Eventually, he had no choice but to resort to robbery and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. I sent someone to look after him while he was in jail. His situation is 100 times worse than mine. At that point, I suddenly understood. He was nothing. Henry was probably desperate by now. Seeing Anna again, he rushed to climb back up the social ladder. Anna remained silent. I know you hate me, he said with red eyes. But I was scared back then. I really didn't mean it. His hand slowly moved upwards. I know you can't forget about me. Anna, do you remember how much you liked me back then? You even gave up George for me. Anna suddenly pushed him away, her eyes full of fury. Don't you dare mention him again. Her voice was icy, and she said without mercy. The biggest regret of my life is saving you back then. She sized him up, and when her eyes landed on his ill-fitting suit, a look of disdain and disgust appeared on her face. The foolish infatuation of youth had completely faded after 10 years, replaced by the sharp clarity of reality. Now, Henry seemed unworthy to even appear in front of Anna. Anna owned 18 companies and was the epitome of a wealthy heiress. Even one of her outfits cost more than what Henry could make in a year. Meanwhile, Henry, once the shining star, was now a former prisoner with no job or prospects. They were from entirely different worlds now. Henry, don't ever show up in front of me again. Henry, terrified by her gaze, opened his mouth but couldn't say a word. Anna walked away without looking back. I turned away and lit a cigarette. What kind of karmic connection was this? When I came back, I never thought I'd run into anyone I knew from the past. But here I was, bumping into them all. What I didn't expect, though, was that Anna had completely lost any lingering affection for Henry. Anna seemed indifferent to everything on the surface, but in reality, she was a very possessive person. Ever since she was young, if she liked something, she had to have it, and she never grew tired of it. Honestly, I thought that since Anna had once liked Henry so much, they'd stay together forever. But I never imagined they'd part so casually. I returned to the dinner party, expecting Henry to have left. To my surprise, he was still there, and he saw me. He walked over holding a glass of wine, as though he had completely forgotten what Anna had just said. He had also forgotten everything that had happened between us. He awkwardly walked up to me, grinning. "Wow, George, it's been a while. How have you been all these years?" I stared at him for a while, said nothing, and turned to leave. If Anna had chosen Henry all those years ago, I could at least understand it. But Henry shutting that door on me had completely pushed me into hell. I still didn't know why he had done it, whether it was out of spite for me getting close to Anna or because he was flailing, trying to buy himself time. And honestly, I didn't care to know. All I knew was that I hated this person in front of me. Especially when he showed up in front of me like it was nothing, I could barely resist the urge to kill him on the spot. I took a deep breath, reminding myself there were too many people around. I couldn't lose control in front of everyone. But Henry wouldn't let go. He grabbed my arm. "We're old classmates, what's with the attitude now? Remember when you were chasing Anna?" He smirked, pulling me closer by the neck. "You were like a dog after her, but she only liked me." He kept talking, trying to vent the frustration he had felt from Anna onto me. I placed my drink on a waiter's tray and loosened my tie. Henry barely had time to react before I punched him, causing his head to snap to the side, his words getting stuck in his throat. I pulled my fist back, feeling the pain in my hand, my gaze growing colder with each passing second. "How dare you hit me?" A flash of venom crossed Henry's eyes as he covered his face and shouted loudly. "George, you motherfucker. You dare hit me? What do you think you are? Someone help, there's been an assault here. Call the police." It was clear he was out of his element in a place like this. The people around watched him like he was some kind of circus act. His voice gradually lowered as I took a handkerchief from my secretary and wiped my hands, carelessly tossing it aside. After seeing the scene unfold, Anna rushed over in a panic, concerned. "George, are you okay?" She scanned me up and down, checking for any injuries. After confirming I was fine, she turned to Henry on the floor, her voice full of disgust. "What the hell are you doing here, making a fool of yourself? Didn't I tell you to leave?" Henry clenched his teeth, still wanting to say something. I looked down at him from above, my voice calm but firm. "Security, get him out of here." 2 large security guards swiftly dragged him away. Henry yelled Anna's name, but she didn't even spare him a glance. I was irritated and shrugged off Anna, walking out of the ballroom. The autumn breeze was chilly, and I only now noticed how cold it had gotten. Selina chased after me, handing me the coat she had prepared for me. "Who was that guy just now? I asked you last time, what's the deal with Anna? How has she been bullying you?" I grabbed the coat, soaking in the warmth it still held. Since everything had happened, I hadn't told anyone about it. I didn't want to talk about it. But now, for some reason, maybe it was the cold autumn night, or maybe it was the warmth of the person beside me, I finally spoke up after a long silence. Selina hadn't said a word for a while. I tugged at the corner of my mouth and gave a faint, bitter smile. The tragedy that happened to someone else always carries a hint of mockery. It was normal for her to find it repulsive. But slowly, she embraced me, blocking out the night with her warmth. It was all I could feel. I whispered, "Am I being a fool?" Selina softly replied, "A little, but not you, them." I couldn't help but smile. I wasn't expecting her to say anything overly sentimental. Selina was a bit of an airhead. The young guys in the company would often try to flirt with her, and she'd think they had something wrong with their eyes and ask if they'd been staring at the computer screen too long. But somehow, the wounds inside me didn't hurt as badly anymore. I suddenly asked, "Selina, do you like me?" I wasn't stupid, and I didn't play games like pretending to be unaware. Selina had been really good to me. She was a great girl, and it was getting hard to pretend I didn't notice. Her face visibly flushed in the dim light, and eventually, even her neck turned bright red. She widened her eyes, her beautiful gaze reflecting my smile. I thought she'd deny it, but to my surprise, she just stared at me. "Did you just figure it out?" I was silent, avoiding her gaze. "I don't want to drag you down. I really don't want to be in a relationship right now. I'd once liked someone too. But the painful end of that unrequited love had scared me. There had been girls showing interest in me over the years, some of them even quite outstanding. I had tried to push myself to give it a shot, but I always backed out at the last moment, unable to bear it. For all these years, it was only Selina's presence that I could tolerate. But that was it. I was really scared. Selina looked a little disappointed but still lifted her smile, one that had no trace of gloom. I understand. I can wait. George, as long as you don't push me away, I won't force anything. I froze. Selina had a great family background and was as beautiful as Anna. Though she had a carefree personality, she still had plenty of men chasing her. Suddenly, an unknown emotion welled up inside me, making my heart ache with a bittersweet feeling. Just then, Anna approached. As soon as she saw me, she anxiously explained. George, I really didn't know he'd be here today. You. She didn't finish her sentence. Before she could say more, Selina's slap landed sharply across Anna's face. She didn't just bluff me, she actually helped me slap Anna. I didn't know how strong Selina was, but she really put some force into it. Anna staggered, almost falling, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Selina's eyes were dark with anger as she sneered. How dare you still show up here? Anna's expression turned cold. She wiped the blood from her mouth. This is between George and me. It's none of your business. Selina retorted, you're harassing my boyfriend and still say it's not my business? I was taken aback, but I quickly realized there was no need to refute Selina's words. Anna was stunned, then turned to me, her eyes filled with disbelief. Boyfriend? George, are you with her now? Yes, Selina said as she linked her arm with mine. Miss Anna, as far as family background and looks go, I can't match you. But as for age, she sized Anna up from head to toe. I'm much younger than you. You should have some self-awareness. If George doesn't choose me, do you think he'd pick you, an old woman? Anna's face turned an ashen gray. I spoke calmly, Anna, I don't need your apology, and I don't need your compensation. Just leave. The color drained from Anna's face immediately. Her throat tightened. Ignoring that Selina was still there, she took a few steps toward me, eyes red as she spoke. George, I really regret it. I beg you, you have no idea how I've been these years. I beg you, please don't do this. Give me another chance. I'll do anything you want. I've finally seen you again. I've been looking for you for 10 years. I looked at Anna seriously. I don't blame you for what happened back then. You don't owe me anything. But Anna, I really don't want to see you again. If you really feel guilty, then never appear in front of me again. Anna stumbled, her face shadowed with deep despair. Then, she forced a bitter smile. Okay. If this is what you wish, I'll agree. I never expected that would be the last time I saw Anna. The next time I heard from her, it was on the local news. Man kills in public out of love and hatred, Hurst Group heir dies on the spot. Henry still couldn't let go of Anna, relentlessly stalking her. Anna was left with nothing but disgust and hatred for him, so she hired someone to beat him up. Henry, who had nothing to begin with, was pushed to the brink of survival by Anna. He turned his hatred on her. One day, as Anna was heading to work, he stopped her in the street and stabbed her 7 or 8 times, each one aimed at a vital point. By the time the ambulance arrived, Anna had already lost her heartbeat. Henry, drenched in blood, stood in the street, laughing maniacally while holding the knife. Anna, what do you think you are? You are the most hypocritical person, you deserve to die. He killed her in public, and many people witnessed it. There was plenty of surveillance footage, so there was no question. The court swiftly sentenced him to death for premeditated murder, and the execution was immediate. My company was expanding overseas, and I was planning to go abroad with Selina. Before I left, I went to see Anna one last time. The photo on Anna's tombstone was from when she was 17. Her eyes were clear, with a hint of a smile. I stood in front of her grave with my hands in my pockets, and suddenly, the image of that girl, her black hair blowing in the wind, appeared before me. She had a pair of stunning peach blossom eyes, and her gaze held a tenderness that was barely perceptible. I asked her, Anna, why didn't you agree when the teacher asked you to skip a grade? She scoffed and turned her head away. If I left, what would you do, you fool? You might not even get into university. I pouted. I'm not that dumb, you're just making things up. She looked at me, a smile flickering in her eyes, and reached out to ruffle my spiky hair. I closed my eyes. It felt like that memory was from so long ago, a memory I hadn't thought of in ages. After she was 17, Anna had changed beyond recognition, becoming someone I could no longer bear to remember. But now that she was gone, I was thinking of her as she once was. I turned around. The 17-year-old girl was propping her chin on her hand, looking at the boy across from her. "Fool, you've been taught this simple problem 100 times and still can't get it right. Whatever will you do without me?" The faces slowly blurred, leaving only emptiness. That foolish youth, after so many years, had finally come to an end. Maybe we should have said goodbye a long time ago. But that goodbye came so late. Anna, if there is an afterlife, I hope we never meet again.
I once thought Henry was the light of my life. In the first 17 years of my life, everything seemed to follow a set routine. It felt like every stage of my life had a plan, what I should do, what I shouldn't do. Every step had to be perfect. I never thought that people could live like Henry did. I had never seen a boy like him. He wasn't good at studying, had a bad reputation, but he seemed so free. He didn't care about anyone's opinion. So, when he blocked my path and said he liked me, I couldn't help but nod, mesmerized by the freedom I saw in his eyes. The time I spent with Henry was so joyful. Before him, I had never experienced life like that. I didn't have to worry about what my parents or teachers thought. I didn't have to worry about grades. I just needed to follow my heart. I became addicted to those days, and grew more and more resentful of the rigid life I had lived before. George represented that rigidity. So when he came to me and said he wanted us to apply to Harvard together, I felt only disgust. I thought I loved Henry. So, in the warehouse, without hesitation, I took his hand and left with him. And then came the fire. It seemed like the fire burned away the confusion in my heart. When I saw Henry again, I was slow to realize something. I didn't love him. I just hated the monotonous life I had, and I had fallen for the so-called freedom that he embodied. When I found out what George had gone through, I broke down. I knelt on the ground, crying uncontrollably, my heart in pieces. I didn't know how he had endured it. I didn't know what I was afraid of. I only knew that I couldn't bear to think about the look of despair in Henry's eyes when I held his hand. In that moment, I knew I had lost something crucial, something irreplaceable. The 10 years that followed, I never saw George again. Our families completely cut ties, and I looked for him everywhere. But George seemed determined to sever all ties with the past. He disappeared without a trace. I traveled to France, the UK, lived in Australia for 3 months, explored all of the Netherlands, and spent the coldest winter in Canada. Many times, I imagined that when I opened my eyes, I'd see the boy with the scarf, smiling with those soft, warm eyes. I started dreaming about him nonstop. The first part of the dreams was always so wonderful. He would be lying on the carpet in my bedroom, frowning and complaining. "Anna, this problem is so hard. Can you explain it to me again?" But when I walked over to him, everything changed. The warehouse was on fire, and there he was, lying in the flames, blood covering his body, leaving a trail of blood tears for me. He didn't say a word. His eyes spoke 1,000 words, haunting me every night, waking me up in the dead of night and keeping me awake until morning. I thought that with time, I would gradually forget him. But his face grew clearer and clearer in my heart. I know that George has become my obsession. It was only after losing him that I realized how much I loved him. Henry was never my light. My light had always been beside me. It had been there for many years. I saw George again 10 years later. For a moment, I thought I had mistaken him. My heart skipped a beat. When I looked around, he was already gone. I don't know how I made it home that day. All I knew was that I felt like a lost soul, my heart swelling with discomfort, screaming painfully inside me. But soon enough, I saw him again. George had changed so much. Or maybe he hadn't changed at all. It was just that the way he looked at me now was completely different. There was no warmth left in his gaze. In that moment, my heart ached with bitterness, like a weary traveler who had been walking alone for years, only to finally see the place they once called home. I thought, no matter how much he blamed me, I would accept it. I wanted to make it up to him. I didn't dare to hope for too much, but secretly, I wished that he could look at me the way he used to. But he seemed to no longer need that. There was someone else by his side. His gaze toward me was devoid of any love. It was as if he was looking at something he wanted to avoid, something filthy. I can't describe the feeling in that moment. It was like a knife from his eyes, stabbing straight into my heart, bloody cold, and so painful that I could hardly stand. I almost tortured myself by feeling that pain. This was my fault. I deserved it. I didn't expect Henry to appear again. He reopened George's wounds, and despite my warnings, he came after me again. Back then, I slapped Henry and broke up with him. I thought everything between us had ended, but now, seeing him again, I realized the hatred in my heart had resurfaced. I even wished he were dead. I knew I was the one who hurt George. But if it weren't for Henry's appearance, maybe we wouldn't have ended up like this. I found someone to get back at him. I never expected him to snap, and in his madness, he stabbed me in the street. But as I felt my life slipping away, I suddenly felt a sense of release. This was exactly what we owed George. Henry and I, we both deserved to rot in hell. After waiting so many years, the final judgment had finally been made, and I realized that, in a strange way, I felt at peace. I looked at the sky, the pure blue without a single cloud. Just like it was 10 years ago. Suddenly, the boy in the white shirt appeared in front of me. He asked me, "Anna, I heard the teacher was looking for you today. Why didn't you accept the offer to skip a grade?" I stood on my tiptoes and reached out to him. His hair was a little stiff, smelling of sunlight. After a long while, I smiled. "Idiot,